The hum of the military transport plane vibrated through the soldier's chest as he sat quietly, staring out at the endless sky. It had been a long deployment, too long. But finally, after months in a war zone, he was coming home. Sergeant Daniel Okoye had counted down the days, the hours, even the minutes until this moment. He had survived the heat of battle, the deafening gunfire, and the weight of responsibility that came with being a soldier. But now? Now he just wanted to see his wife. He reached into his chest pocket and pulled out a folded photograph. It was a little worn around the edges, but it still showed the same beautiful woman with a radiant smile. Sandra. His wife. His world. A fellow soldier nudged him with a knowing grin. "Thinking about home, huh?" Daniel chuckled. "Yeah, man, can't wait to hold my wife again." The other man sighed. "Enjoy it. Nothing beats coming home to someone waiting for you." Daniel nodded. He had missed everything about Sandra. Her laugh, the way she teased him about his rigid military habits, even the scent of her hair when she hugged him tight. The plane landed with a thud, shaking him from his thoughts. As they disembarked, he took a deep breath. This was it. He was finally home. The drive from the base to his house was long, but Daniel didn't mind. Every passing street felt like a step closer to the life he had been dreaming about. He had imagined this moment so many times. Sandra waiting at the door, arms open, ready to welcome him home. He had called her the night before to let her know he was on his way. She had sounded happy, excited even, but something about her tone had been different. He had shrugged it off, telling himself it was just his mind playing tricks on him. The taxi pulled up to the house, and Daniel felt his heart quicken. Home, the place where he could finally be at peace. He grabbed his duffel bag and stepped out, inhaling deeply. But something felt off. The house was quiet. Too quiet. No porch lights, no decorations, no eager wife waiting at the door. His smile faltered. Where was Sandra? Daniel unlocked the front door and stepped inside, expecting the scent of home-cooked food or the warmth of a loving embrace. Instead, he was met with an eerie silence. He set his bag down slowly, his senses tingling. Something wasn't right. His boots echoed against the hardwood floor as he made his way to the kitchen. Empty. The living room? Dark and still. His heart pounded against his ribs. Then he noticed it. A wine glass half full resting on the coffee table. Beside it, another glass, smudged with fingerprints that weren't his. His jaw tightened. Someone had been here. A sound. A muffled giggle. His stomach twisted as his military-trained ears locked onto the source. It was coming from the bedroom. Daniel's breathing slowed. His training kicked in. Years on the battlefield had sharpened his instincts, made him hyper-aware of danger. But this was a different kind of war. He moved silently down the hallway, his pulse hammering in his ears. As he approached the bedroom door, the giggling turned into soft whispers. His fingers curled into fists. He pushed the door open, and the world collapsed beneath him. There, in his bed, the same bed he had shared with his wife, Sandra lay tangled in the sheets with another man. The air left his lungs. The betrayal hit like a bullet. Sandra gasped, scrambling to cover herself, her face frozen in shock. "Daniel!" The man beside her, bare-chested, smug, completely unashamed, grinned. "Damn, welcome home, soldier." A flash of red-hot fury shot through Daniel's veins. His hands twitched toward his belt, toward the holster that wasn't there. Sandra started babbling. It's not what it looks like. I can explain." But there was nothing to explain. The evidence was right in front of him. Daniel's hands clenched into fists so tight his knuckles turned white. He had been willing to die for this woman. He had fought wars, risked his life, survived horrors beyond imagination for her. And this is what he came home to? His vision blurred, rage swallowing every ounce of rationality. The man smirked, stretching lazily, completely unbothered by the fact that he had just shattered another man's life. That smirk was a mistake. Daniel lunged. Daniel's fists clenched as he lunged forward, but at the last second he stopped himself. His breathing was ragged, his vision red, but something deep inside held him back. For now. The man in his bed wasn't worth dying over. Not yet. Sandra was scrambling for words, her hands shaking as she clutched the bedsheet around her body. "Daniel, please, But Daniel wasn't listening. He had already left the room, mentally. His mind raced back to the little moments that now made perfect sense. The red flags. He had ignored them, dismissed them. The first had come before his deployment. Sandra had been distant, more distracted than usual. Whenever he brought up his leave date, she would change the subject or look uncomfortable. Then there were the missed phone calls. She had always been so eager to hear from him, but over time her responses grew shorter, colder. Sometimes she wouldn't even answer at all. When he asked about it, she always had an excuse. Bad network. I was sleeping. I was with a friend. Daniel had believed her, like a fool. And then there was the biggest clue of all, the one his gut had screamed at him to pay attention to. When he had called her the night before returning, there had been something in her voice. Hesitation. Not excitement, not love. Something close to fear. Now he knew why. The silence in the room was suffocating. Sandra was crying now, tears streaming down her face as she reached out toward him. "Daniel, it was a mistake. I never meant for this to happen." The man beside her scoffed, running a hand through his hair. "Come on, babe, let's not lie to the man." He smirked at Daniel, completely unbothered. She knew exactly what she was doing. That was it. Daniel snapped. His body moved before his mind could stop him. He lunged across the room and grabbed the man by the throat, slamming him against the wall. The impact shook the entire bedroom. Sandra screamed. The man struggled, gasping for breath, but Daniel's grip was iron. "What did you say?" Daniel's voice was low, dangerous, a voice he had used in war. The man clawed at Daniel's hands, his face turning red. Daniel tightened his grip. Sandra grabbed his arm. "Daniel, please, don't do this." Daniel hesitated. His training had taught him how to kill in seconds. He could end this man right here, right now. But a different battle raged inside him. Would killing this man change anything? Would it erase the betrayal? His grip loosened just slightly. That was enough for the man to throw a desperate punch. It landed on Daniel's jaw, snapping his head to the side. The coward took his chance and bolted. He didn't even stop for Sandra. The front door slammed. Gone. Daniel staggered back, his chest heaving. His hands trembled, not from fear, but from rage. His entire life had shattered in minutes. Sandra stood frozen, sobbing. "Please, Daniel, don't leave. I can explain." Daniel's eyes burned into her. "Explain?" His voice was hollow. "What is there to explain, Sandra?" She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. He shook his head, stepping back. "How long?" Sandra looked away. "How long?" His voice rose, his body tense. 6 months, she whispered. Daniel let out a bitter laugh. 6 months? His fists clenched. "I was gone for 9. Sandra sobbed harder. "I never meant for it to happen. I swear. I love you, Daniel." Daniel felt sick. The woman he had dreamed of coming home to had betrayed him while he was fighting for his country. And now she wanted to pretend it meant nothing? His hand hovered over his belt, where his weapon should have been. He had killed men before. Enemies. Men who had tried to take his life. And yet, standing here, looking at Sandra, he had never felt such pure hatred. His voice dropped, deadly calm. "You love me?" Sandra nodded, desperation in her eyes. "Yes, more than anything." Daniel exhaled. "Then prove it." Sandra blinked. "What?" Daniel grabbed his duffel bag, unzipping it slowly. The gun inside glinted under the light. Sandra's breath hitched. "Daniel, what are you doing?" Daniel lifted the gun and chambered a round. Sandra stumbled back, shaking. "Please, Daniel stared at her for a long, heavy moment. Then he turned and walked toward the door. Sandra let out a strangled sob. "Daniel, where are you going?" He didn't look back. "I have one last thing to take care of." Daniel walked out of the house, gripping his gun tightly. His mind was racing, but his instincts were sharp. He had been trained to handle intense situations, to react under pressure. But nothing, not war, not the battlefield, not even death, had prepared him for this kind of betrayal. His boots crunched against the gravel as he stepped onto the street. Where had that man gone? He needed answers. Daniel's mind replayed the past few months. Sandra had changed. He had ignored the signs, convinced himself that she was just stressed, that the distance had made things difficult. But the truth was right in front of him now. She had moved on. While he was risking his life, she had been in their bed with another man. A wave of rage and humiliation surged through him. That man had mocked him, had smiled while lying in his bed, touching his wife. The thought made his grip on the gun tighten. He reached the end of the street and scanned the area. No sign of him. The coward had run. Daniel knew how to track a target. It was second nature. He could find him, hunt him down like an enemy in war. But then a thought stopped him in his tracks. Would that make him any better than the men he had killed on the battlefield? He clenched his jaw. No, he needed to be smart. He turned back toward the house. Sandra wasn't off the hook yet. Sandra was still sitting on the floor when Daniel walked back in. Her face was buried in her hands, her body shaking with silent sobs. She lifted her head as he entered, her eyes filled with fear. "Daniel, please, just listen to me." Daniel stared at her. This was the woman he had promised to love forever, the woman he had imagined growing old with, and now she was just a stranger. "Talk," he said flatly, his voice cold. Sandra hesitated, then took a deep breath. "It didn't start out like this," she whispered. "I didn't mean to hurt you." Daniel scoffed. "You didn't mean to? You had a man in our bed, Sandra. You had months to stop, and you didn't." She swallowed hard. "I was lonely," she admitted. "You were gone for so long. I missed you, Daniel. I needed..." Daniel's eyes darkened. "You needed what, Sandra? Someone else?" Sandra flinched. "It wasn't like that." Daniel leaned against the wall, crossing his arms. "Then explain it to me, because from where I'm standing, it looks exactly like that." She wiped her face, sniffing. "It was a mistake," she whispered. "At first I thought it was just someone to talk to, but then it got out of hand." Daniel felt something inside him snap. She had a choice, and every single time she had chosen to betray him. He shook his head. "You ruined everything." Sandra called closer, her hands clasped together. "I'll do anything, Daniel. Just please don't leave me." Daniel's eyes were cold, unreadable. For the first time, he felt nothing for her. No love, no sympathy, just a deep, bitter disappointment. He studied her for a long moment. "Do you regret what you did, or do you regret getting caught?" Sandro didn't answer. That was all he needed to know. He turned, walking toward the bedroom. "Daniel, wait! Where are you going?" Sandra's voice cracked with panic. He opened their closet, pulling out a small duffel bag. He didn't need much, just the essentials. Sandra scrambled to her feet. "You're leaving?" Daniel zipped up the bag. "You think I can stay here?" Her face twisted in panic. "Where will you go?" Daniel threw the bag over his shoulder. "Anywhere but here." He walked past her, ignoring the way she reached out for him. She had already lost him. Sandra sobbed. "I love you, Daniel." He stopped at the door. "No, you don't." And with that, he stepped outside, slamming the door behind him. Daniel walked away from the house, his heart pounding, his mind racing. Every step he took felt like he was leaving behind a part of himself. The home he had built with Sandra, The life he had envisioned, all of it was gone, torn apart by her betrayal. He could still hear her voice in his head, begging him to stay, saying she loved him. Lies. If she had loved him, she wouldn't have done this. She wouldn't have let another man into their bed. His grip tightened on his duffel bag as he reached his car. He threw it into the passenger seat, his mind still battling the storm of emotions swirling inside him. He could drive away, disappear, start over somewhere new. But something inside him refused to let it go. He couldn't just leave like this. Sandra had destroyed him, shattered everything he had sacrificed for. And now, she was crying, acting like she was the victim? No. She didn't get to move on so easily. His hands clenched into fists as he made a decision. He had unfinished business. And it started with the man who had stolen his wife. Daniel didn't need to search for long. His military instincts told him exactly where the coward would be hiding. He wasn't at Sandra's house, that much was clear. No, a man like him would run to familiar ground, a place where he felt safe. It didn't take much digging. A few calls to old friends, a couple of questions around town, and Daniel had what he needed. The man's name was Leon, and Leon had just made the biggest mistake of his life. By the time Daniel pulled up outside a rundown apartment building, his rage had settled into something colder, more calculated. This wasn't blind fury anymore. This was a mission. He stepped out of his car, his boots hitting the pavement with purpose. He had fought in wars, faced enemies with guns trained on his back. One unarmed coward didn't scare him. He knocked on the door. Once. Twice. Silence. Then, footsteps, hesitant, careful. The door cracked open just a little, and then Daniel saw him. Leon's cocky smirk was gone. In its place, fear. Leon stuttered, "Man, listen." Daniel's hand shot out, grabbing Leon by the collar. In one swift move, he slammed him against the wall. Leon gasped. "Wait." "No talking," Daniel growled. Leon's eyes darted around. He was looking for an escape, but Daniel was faster, stronger, deadlier. "You thought you could lay in my bed," Daniel hissed, "touch my wife, and walk away?" Leon swallowed hard. I didn't know she was married." Daniel let out a humorless laugh. "Lies." He tightened his grip. "I should end you right here." Leon's body trembled. He knew Daniel wasn't bluffing. But Daniel didn't need to kill him. No. Death was easy. He wanted Leon to feel something worse. "I'm not going to kill you," Daniel said finally, his voice cold. "But I will make sure you never forget this." Leon's breath hitched. What do you mean?" Daniel leaned in, his tone deadly calm. "You took everything from me," he whispered. "So now, I take everything from you." Leon paled. And that's when Daniel let go. Leon stumbled backward, gasping for breath as Daniel released his grip. The fear in his eyes was unmistakable. This wasn't the cocky man who had mocked him in his own bed. No. Now Leon was prey. Daniel stood tall, his fists clenched at his sides. Every part of him wanted to break this man, to make him feel the same pain, the same humiliation. But no, that would be too easy. "Please, man," Leon stammered. "I didn't mean for this to happen." Daniel smirked. "Oh, just like my wife didn't mean to cheat?" Leon swallowed hard, his back pressed against the wall. He knew he wasn't walking away from this unscathed. Daniel tilted his head. "Let me ask you something," he said, his voice calm, too calm. "Do you have a job, Leon?" Leon blinked, confused. "A job," Daniel repeated. "Something respectable? Or are you just some lowlife who sleeps with other men's wives for fun?" Leon's throat bobbed. I work at a car dealership." Daniel let out a low chuckle. "Perfect." He stepped forward, towering over the man. "So, what do you think would happen if I walked into your workplace right now, maybe had a little chat with your boss?" Leon's breath hitched. Yeah, you wouldn't. Daniel leaned in. Try me. The next morning, Daniel walked into Leon's workplace. He had spent all night thinking. Killing Leon would have been easy, but he wanted something better. He wanted Leon to feel the walls closing in. The dealership was busy, customers browsing cars, employees in their uniforms, and right there, standing near a flashy sports car, was Leon. Leon's eyes widened as soon as he saw Daniel. Panic flashed across his face. He turned as if he was about to run, but Daniel was faster. He called out, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Leon, just the man I wanted to see." Leon froze, his entire body tensing. Customers turned to look. His co-workers glanced at him, curious. Daniel smiled. It was time to ruin him. "I just wanted to stop by and talk about something important," Daniel said smoothly, walking up to Leon. "You know, about how you spent months sneaking around with my wife while I was deployed." Gasps. Murmurs. The entire showroom went silent. Leon went pale. "Daniel," he hissed, "not here." Danielle raised an eyebrow. "Why not? You weren't so quiet when you were in my bed." A co-worker choked on his drink. Another employee's jaw dropped. A woman who had been in the middle of signing paperwork for a car snapped her head up. Daniel folded his arms. I just think your boss should know the kind of employee he's got working here. A liar, a cheater, a coward. Leon looked ready to collapse. "Dude, stop." But it was too late. His manager stepped forward. "Leon?" His expression was one of pure disappointment. "Is this true?" Leon opened his mouth, but no words came out. Daniel smirked. Checkmate. Leon was fired on the spot. Humiliated. Expose. As he stumbled out of the dealership, Daniel followed him. Leon whirled around, rage and humiliation twisting his face. "You ruined my life, man." Daniel chuckled. "Funny, that's exactly what you did to me." Leon had nothing left to say. He turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. Daniel watched him go, his heart finally calm. He had won, and he hadn't needed to pull the trigger to do it. Daniel stood outside the dealership, watching Leon disappear into the crowded streets. It was over. Leon had been humiliated, stripped of his job, and exposed as a coward. But why did it still feel like it wasn't enough? His hands clenched into fists as he exhaled slowly. He had always believed in justice, in doing the right thing. But what justice was there for a man who had fought for his country, only to come home to betrayal? His phone buzzed in his pocket. He hesitated before pulling it out. A message from Sandra. "Daniel, please come home. Let's talk." He stared at the screen, his pulse slow and steady. Talk? What was left to say? She had already shattered his world. He slid his phone back into his pocket and turned away. He wasn't going back. Not yet. First, he needed answers. Daniel didn't go back to Sandra's house. He went to see an old friend. An hour later, he was sitting across from Corporal Ahmed, one of his closest brothers in arms from the military. Ahmed studied him carefully. "You look like a man on the edge," he said, sipping his coffee. "What's going on?" Daniel's jaw tightened. "I need you to run a background check on someone." Ahmed raised an eyebrow. "You know that's not exactly legal." "I don't care," Daniel said coldly. "Find everything you can on Leon." Ahmed leaned back, his expression unreadable. "What's really going on, Daniel?" Daniel exhaled sharply. "My wife cheated on me, with him." Ahmed set his coffee down. "Say no more." A few hours later, Ahmed called. Daniel picked up instantly. "Tell me what you found." Ahmed's voice was serious. Too serious. "Brother, you're not gonna like this." Daniel's fingers tightened around his phone. "Tell me." There was silence on the other end. Then, "Leon isn't just some random guy, Daniel. He was planted." Daniel's breath caught. "What?" Ahmed sighed. "Leon has been connected to, let's just say, some dangerous people. People who target soldiers' families while they're deployed." Daniel's blood ran cold. You're telling me this wasn't just an affair? Ahmed hesitated. I think Leon was paid to seduce your wife. Daniel's world tilted. The rage inside him roared back to life. This wasn't just about betrayal anymore. It was about revenge. Daniel's grip on the phone tightened as Ahmed's words sank in. Leon was planted. The betrayal hadn't just been an affair, it was a setup. His pulse pounded in his ears. He had spent weeks, months, blaming Sandra, thinking it was just a mistake, a selfish, thoughtless mistake. But now it was bigger than that. Who paid him? Daniel's voice was eerily calm, but inside, he was a storm. Ahmed sighed. It's not just one guy, brother. This goes deeper. There's a whole network that preys on soldiers while they're deployed. They target the wives of men overseas, using charm, money, whatever it takes, to break families apart. Daniel's fingers curled into a fist. He had fought wars. He had killed men to protect his country, and now he realized while he was out there defending his home, someone was destroying it from within. Ahmed continued. From what I found, Leon has been doing this for years. He gets close to wives of deployed soldiers, seduces them, and then, well, sometimes it's just an affair, but other times, Ahmed's voice darkened. They use it to blackmail the soldiers, to control them. Daniel's stomach churned. Was Sandra part of this? Had she been a willing participant, or just another pawn in their twisted game? Only one way to find out. An hour later, Daniel stood outside his house. He hadn't planned on coming back, not this soon, but after what he'd just learned, he needed answers, now. The door creaked open when he pushed it. Sandra was sitting on the couch, clutching her phone, her eyes swollen from crying. When she saw him, she jumped to her feet. Daniel, you came back. Daniel didn't respond. He locked eyes with her, studying her. He had been trained to read people, to see through lies. And now, as he stood in front of the woman who had betrayed him, he needed to know one thing. Tell me the truth, he said, his voice low. Did you know who Leon really was? Sandra's breath caught. Daniel saw it, the flicker of fear, the hesitation, the lie forming before she even spoke. I don't know what you mean, she stammered. Wrong answer. Daniel stepped forward, his presence commanding, unshakable. Don't lie to me, Sandra. I know everything. She swallowed hard. I swear, Daniel, I didn't know. He let the silence stretch, watching, waiting, and then finally she cracked. Sandra's hands trembled as she sank back onto the couch, burying her face in her palms. I didn't at first, she whispered. I swear, I didn't. But later I figured it out. Daniel's jaw tightened. And you still stayed with him? Tears spilled down her cheeks. I was scared, Daniel. He told me if I said anything they would come after me. After you. He said it was bigger than just us. Daniel clenched his fists. She knew. Maybe she hadn't started this as a betrayal, but when she learned the truth, she had stayed. She had chosen silence over loyalty. You should have told me, Daniel said, his voice colder than steel. Sandra sobbed. I was trying to protect you. Daniel shook his head. No, you were protecting yourself. The betrayal ran deeper than he had imagined. And now, someone was going to pay. Daniel stood in the middle of his living room, staring at Sandra as she sobbed on the couch. She had known. Maybe not from the start, but when she figured out what Leon was doing, she still chose silence. She had chosen fear over loyalty. Dio had risked his life countless times. He had faced death on the battlefield, stared down the enemy without flinching. But this betrayal? It felt like a knife twisting deep in his chest. He took a slow breath, controlling his anger. Now wasn't the time to lose control. He had a mission. And that mission was to find out who was really behind this. Sandra wiped her face, looking up at him with swollen eyes. Daniel, what are you going to do? He turned, walking toward the door. I'm going to end this. She gasped, "No, Daniel, please. Don't go after them, these people. They're dangerous." Daniel smirked. "So am I." Daniel made one more call to Ahmed. He needed names. Within an hour, he had them. People behind the operation, not just Leon. He was small time. The real players were bigger, untouchable. Or so they thought. He drove to an address Ahmed had given him, parking a few blocks away. A warehouse on the outskirts of town. He knew places like this well. He had raided them before, overseas. He stepped out of the car, scanning the area. No guards outside. Too quiet. Danielle moved like a ghost, slipping into the shadows. Inside the warehouse, voices echoed. "Leon screwed up," a man was saying. "The soldier found out." Daniel's muscles tensed. They were talking about him. Another voice scoffed. "So what? He's just one guy. He won't do anything." Daniel smiled. Right. He moved forward, slipping through the darkness until he was just outside the main room. 5 men inside. He could take them. He stepped into the light. The room fell silent. One man, sitting at the head of a table, leaned back, unimpressed. "Well, well," he said, "the soldier finally shows up." Daniel's expression didn't change. "Who hired Leon?" The man chuckled. "You don't get to ask questions." Daniel pulled his gun. The room tensed. "I'll ask one more time," he said, his voice calm, deadly. "Who hired Leon?" The man smirked. "You think you scare me, soldier?" Daniel fired a single shot into the man's knee. A scream tore through the room. The others froze. Now they understood. Daniel wasn't here to play games. He turned to the next man. "Your turn." The man's hands trembled. "Please, I'll talk." Daniel stepped closer. "Good. Start talking." Because tonight, the hunt had begun. The man's hands shook violently as he stared at Daniel, his face pale with fear. The sound of their boss screaming in agony filled the warehouse, the bullet wound in his knee turning the cold cement floor dark with blood. Daniel had spent years in war zones. He knew how to interrogate, how to make a man talk. And tonight, he had no mercy. "I'll talk," the man stammered, his voice cracking. "Please, just don't shoot me." Daniel didn't blink. He took a slow step forward, pressing the barrel of his gun against the man's forehead. "Who hired Leon?" The man swallowed hard. It wasn't just one person. It's an organization. They work with guys like Leon, target soldiers' wives. The goal is to..." He hesitated. Daniel's grip tightened. "Finish the sentence." The man flinched. "The goal is to break them." Daniel's stomach churned, but he didn't let it show. Break them. Soldiers. The very men who had sacrificed their lives for their country. The man kept talking, his words spilling out like a confession. "They pick women who are easy targets, lonely, weak. They get close to them, ruin their marriages. If the soldier is important enough, they use the affair as leverage, blackmail, control." Daniel's blood boiled. He had been a target. Not just him, many others. "How do I find them?" Daniel asked, his voice cold. The man hesitated. That was a mistake. Daniel pulled the trigger. Not a bullet, just a warning shot into the ground. The man screamed, falling to his knees. "I swear, I don't know exactly, but there's someone higher up. His name is Mikhail. He runs the operations in this region." Daniel's mind locked onto the name. Mikhail. Now he had a real target. Daniel turned to the man on the floor, his body shaking in fear. "Where can I find him?" I don't know the exact location," the man stuttered, his breath ragged. "But he moves between clubs, private houses. He's always surrounded by security. You can't just walk in and..." Daniel smirked. "Watch me." The man flinched, his terror obvious. Daniel took a step back, lowering his gun. "You're lucky I'm in a good mood tonight." The man exhaled shakily, his shoulders relaxing. Daniel raised his gun again. A single shot. The man collapsed. Daniel turned to the remaining 2 men in the room who were too terrified to move. He pointed his gun at them. "Leave town, tonight. If I ever see your faces again, you won't be walking away." They nodded frantically. Daniel walked out of the warehouse, his pulse steady. He had what he needed. Now it was time for war. Back in his car, Daniel dialed Ahmed. Ahmed picked up immediately. "Tell me you got something." Daniel's voice was calm, too calm. "I need everything you can find on a man named Mikhail." Ahmed whistled. "That's a big name, brother. This guy doesn't mess around." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Neither do I." A pause. Then, "I'll send you everything I find." Daniel hung up and stared at the city lights in the distance. Somewhere in that city, Mikhail was sitting in luxury, thinking he was untouchable. That was about to change. Because Daniel was coming, and nothing would stop him. Daniel sat in his car, gripping the steering wheel as Ahmed's message came through. Mikhail, the man who had orchestrated everything, the one who had shattered his life. The file contained addresses, movements, known associates. It painted a clear picture. Mikhail wasn't just some small-time con artist. He was a powerful figure, protected, untouchable. But Daniel had never believed in the word untouchable. His military training kicked in. This was a mission now, not about revenge, about justice. And he wouldn't stop until Mikhail was eliminated. The club was in the heart of the city. High-end, expensive, exclusive. Mikhail liked to surround himself with luxury. Women, money, power. But Daniel knew the type. Men like him thought they were gods. They built their empires on the pain of others, never expecting it to collapse. And Daniel stepped out of his car, fully in control. He had no fear. He had fought wars in places deadlier than this. A doorman stopped him at the entrance. "Private party?" the man grunted. Daniel didn't hesitate. A single punch to the throat, and the man went down. Silently. He slipped inside. The hunt was on. Inside, the air was thick with smoke and alcohol. Music thumped, bodies moved, laughter echoed. But Daniel had only one focus. Mikhail sat in the VIP section, surrounded by women, laughing like he owned the world. Daniel's fingers itched for his gun, but no, not yet. This had to be perfect. He moved closer, slipping past security. One guard at the entrance, easily distracted. Another near the bar, too drunk to care. And then he was there, standing right in front of Mikhail. The man looked up, surprised at the sudden intrusion. "Who the hell are you?" he demanded. Daniel smiled. "The last face you'll ever see." The first shot took out the nearest guard. Chaos erupted. Women screamed. Security reached for their weapons. But Daniel was faster, deadlier, precise. The second shot hit another guard, sending him crashing into a table. Mikhail stumbled back, eyes wide. For the first time, he looked afraid. Daniel lunged, grabbing him by the collar. "You thought you could destroy me," Daniel growled. "You thought you could ruin my life and walk away." Mikhail struggled, but Daniel slammed him against the glass railing. The music had stopped. The entire club was watching. Mikhail coughed, blood dripping from his lip. "It was just business," he gasped. "Nothing personal." Daniel's grip tightened. "To you, maybe. But to me?" He threw Mikhail over the railing. The man screamed as he plummeted, crashing through a glass table below. Silence. Daniel stared down at the body. It was over. The nightmare was over. Outside, Daniel walked calmly to his car, his heartbeat finally steady. His phone buzzed. "Ahmed." "Tell me it's done," Ahmed said. Daniel exhaled. "It's done." A pause. Then Ahmed sighed. "What now?" Daniel looked at the city lights. He had been a soldier, a husband, a man who once believed in love, in family, in honor. Now he was something else. He got into his car and started the engine. "What now?" Daniel repeated. He smirked. "Now, I disappear. The end."